23. The stove snaps softly before the sun comes up. I am standing barefoot on the cold kitchen floor, counting the sounds I'm allowed to hear. Wood popping, kettle filling, my own breath. He pulls out his chair without looking at me. The scrape is loud in the quiet, too loud. The air smells like bread dough and last night's smoke. Everything looks right. Everything feels wrong. I keep my hands busy so they won't shake. I don't know yet what I've done, but I already know I won't be spoken to today. My name is Sarah, and this is Sarah Amish Aunt. I tell the stories I once kept quiet, the ones faith never prepared us to name. If you've ever felt silenced by something that looked like peace, you're not alone here. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt punished without being told why? Mornings were always my favorite part of the day. Before the children woke, before the wagons rolled past the house, before words could be misplaced. The kitchen belonged to me then. I laid out the plates carefully, the blue-rimmed ones saved for weekdays, lining them by habit rather than thought. The stove warmed one side of my body while the window leaked onto the other. When he came in, he nodded once, not unkindly, just finished. The space between us filled with something thicker than quiet, a silence with weight. I felt it settle before I could name it. There were many kinds of quiet in our home. The good kind came after evening singings, when voices still hummed in the walls. The holy kind came during prayer when stillness felt shared, but this was neither. This quiet sat only on me. He ate without lifting his eyes. He passed the butter to the children. He asked our son about the barn. To anyone watching, nothing was wrong. To me, every small movement felt measured, like walking on a floor I knew could give way. I learned the difference the way you learn weather, by pressure, not by sight. Each morning like that began with checking, not the stove, not the bread, myself. I ran backward through the last days, looking for the place where I had stepped wrong. Had I spoken too plainly? Laughed too loud at the singing? Asked a question I should have swallowed? The list was endless because the rules were never spoken. I learned to replay conversations the way some women recite prayers, hoping repetition would bring clarity. It never did. The silence didn't explain itself. It waited, and I waited with it, trying to become small enough for it to pass. The silence was not dramatic. That's important. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices. He still rose early, still worked hard, still helped neighbors, still lifted our youngest onto his shoulders. The absence was precise, surgical, warmth removed only where it could hurt, questions answered with one word, touch forgotten, not refused. At night, inches of space lay between us beneath the quilt we had received when we married. I stared at the stitching, counting patterns until sleep came. I told myself this was maturity, that a godly woman did not need reassurance. That peace meant endurance. We were raised on Gelassenheit, yielding, surrender, the quiet bending of self. A soft woman was a faithful woman. A questioning spirit was a dangerous one. No one had to say this out loud. It lived in sermons, in the Ordnung, in the way older women smiled when you learned not to press. When the silence came, I did not call it cruelty. I called it correction. I believed his withdrawal meant I had disturbed the balance and that my quiet obedience would restore it. Silence, I thought, was my penance. My stillness was how I fixed what I had broken. The Ordnung worked even when no one was watching. That was its strength. I never told anyone about the quiet days. Why would I? There was nothing to point to, nothing bruised, nothing spoken, only a feeling that followed me like a shadow. At church, I kept my eyes lowered. At frolics, I laughed softly. I learned to disappear in plain sight. The community didn't need to enforce the rules inside my home. I carried them myself. I enforced them on my own body, my own voice. The silence had helpers, and I was one of them. I remember the first time clearly, early in our marriage. Snow pressed against the windows, turning the world white and soundless. I asked, carefully, about a decision he had made. Nothing large, just a visit I hoped for. He did not argue. He nodded, and then he went quiet. 3 days, 3 nights, the quilt between us felt heavier than it should have. I apologized without knowing for what. On the 4th morning, he spoke again, kindly as if nothing had happened. Relief flooded me. I told myself I had learned something valuable. I didn't know what it was yet. I never once heard the word punishment. That isn't what it was called. The silence had a better name, a safer one. I will tell you what it was called, but first you need to meet someone. Because for years, I believed this was my private failure, my marriage, my doing. I thought no one else lived inside this kind of quiet. That afternoon, at a quilting frolic, a woman I had known since girlhood said one small thing that changed the shape of everything I understood. We were seated close enough that our elbows brushed, needles moving in a rhythm we had learned as girls. The room was full, women talking, laughing, children drifting in and out, but the sound thinned between us. She didn't look up when she said it. Just a soft comment, almost a joke. Something about how the quiet days always came after she spoke too freely. My hands stopped. The threads slipped. In my chest, a cold stillness spread, the kind that arrives when a truth has already decided to be known. She knew. Not my story exactly, but the shape of it. The silence had another witness. We did not say much more. We didn't need to. Later, when we stood to stretch, she added a detail so ordinary it felt unreal that the quiet always ended when she became careful again. Smaller, softer, when she made herself agreeable enough to disappear. My breath caught because that was the rule in my house, too. Not spoken, enforced by absence. She described the same morning checking, the same ache of wondering, the same strange relief when warmth returned. Different homes, same pattern. I remember thinking, this isn't a marriage problem. This is a language we were all taught to speak, and some of us were taught to suffer inside it. The silence was never called punishment. That word would have been too plain. It was called patience, giving space, letting the Lord work on a heart. Sometimes it was called peace. I had heard those words my whole life, spoken gently by women I trusted. I had used them myself. The silence meant he was being righteous, that he was waiting for my spirit to settle. My discomfort was proof something in me needed changing. Sitting there with the quilt in my lap, I felt the truth rise up without anger, just clarity. The silence was not holy waiting. It was control wrapped in scripture, and I had been praising it as virtue. I stepped outside when the room felt too small. The cold air met my face, sharp and clean. A wagon passed on the road, wheels creaking slow and steady. I watched my breath blue fade. There was no dramatic moment, no decision. Just the quiet understanding that once you see the shape of a cage, you cannot pretend it is open. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the cold steady me. For the first time, the silence inside my chest was not fear. It was recognition, and it did not ask me to shrink. It asked me to see. Both things were true. I loved him. I loved the way our life moved with the seasons, the orchard in bloom, the sound of singing carried on warm nights. I loved the children we made and the home we kept. And the quiet still harmed me. He was not a monster. He was a man raised with the same language, given the same tools, never told to question them. The system taught us all what silence could do. It taught women to endure it, and men to use it without naming it. Beauty and harm lived in the same house. Acknowledging one did not erase the other. If you have ever spent a morning searching yourself for a mistake no one named, this space is for you. Stay with me here at Sarah Amish Aunt. Subscribe if these stories sound like your own, and tell me quietly in the comments, have you known this kind of silence too? We had a word for it in the community when it was done openly. Meidung. The withdrawal meant to bring someone back into order through isolation. What happened in my marriage was the same teaching applied behind closed doors. Silence as correction, warmth as reward. I did not need to be cast out to learn compliance. I learned it at my own table when I finally spoke again. It was not loud. It was not brave in the way stories like to be. I said one true thing, calmly, and I waited. The storm did not come. Something inside me stayed. I did not suddenly become free, but I became present. I felt my voice return the way memory does, familiar, almost forgotten. If you are listening to this, you already know your own truth. You have known it longer than you have let yourself say. Silence has many names. Not all of them are holy. You are allowed to name what has kept you quiet, and you are allowed to speak anyway.